In his ascent to power, Marcos was well aware of the role that the media played in the society, and he exerted considerable effort to exercise control over it. Greetings, it's Samantha Nicole and Idel again, and now we will be discussing cultural and media censorship during the period of martial law in the Philippines. By shutting down competing voices and setting up the media outlet that was under his control, Marcos silenced public criticism and controlled the information that the people had access to. By doing so, Marcos had the final say in whatever passed for the truth. September 21, 1972 was the day Marcos declared martial law. Marcos aimed to create a new society under a system he termed constitutional authoritarianism, which he claimed would bring stability and economic reform to the country. However, the martial law led to widespread political repression, including the arbitrary arrest of thousands of people. Linked with martial law is the judiciary, legislative, and executive was in the hands of Ferdinand Marcos. That there was no separation of power and checks and balances. When martial law was declared, it brought big changes not just in politics and government, but also in our culture and freedom to express. One big part of it was the media or press. The government often stops cultural works that speaks against it. Artists, writers, filmmakers, and musicians became target of this censorship, especially if their work went against the government. After declaring martial law, Marcos quickly moved to silence criticism. He ordered the arrest of senators, congressmen, governors, constitutional convention delegates, publishers, and journalists without trial. He also shut down all media outlets, including radio and newspapers, along with key public utilities such as electricity, water supply, telecommunication, and transportation companies, specifically aircrafts. Marcos issued the first letter of instruction on the prevention of the use of privately owned media facilities and communication. Malacañang, Manila, September 22, 1972, directing the military takeover control to newspapers, radios, and television facilities to prevent further use of his so-called propaganda purposes against the government. Among those shutdowns, the Manila Time, Manila Chronicles, Manila Day Bulletin, Channel 5, ABS-CBN, etc. was ordered to be closed during martial law. Amidst the news outlets being sequestered, some were still allowed to continue running print issues and airing shows on airwaves. This includes the Philippine Daily Express, the Canlaon Broadcasting System, and several television channels. However, it is important to note that these remaining media outlets all belong to Marcos' cronies. Roberto Benedicto, for instance, owned Canlawan and Daily Express, while greatly enjoying Marcos' favor as his appointed chairman of the Philippine National Bank, ambassador to Japan, and head of the Philippine Sugar Commission. Journalists who criticized the regime or Imelda Marcos were monitored, harassed, or detained. Media owners often choose cooperation over resistance to protect their businesses. Hans Menzi, owner of the Manila Bulletin, was one of them. When his columnists angered the Marcoses, he intervened to avoid government retaliation. In 1972, he even gave up columnist Amelita Ratio Cruz to the authorities because her writings about Marcos' affair and her jokes about Imelda Marcos made the First Lady very angry. By the early 1980s, tension rose again as writers such as Domini Torrevillas Olivares, Leti Jimenez Magsanok de Jesus published politically critical pieces. By 1983, Marcos had lost patience with those outspoken women. Under pressure from the palace, Menzies dismissed them to protect his newspaper and avoid a political crackdown. Strict press control under Marcos stripped the media of independence and credibility. Censorship and licensing rules allowed Marcos' allies to run TV, radio, and newspapers that promoted the regime and silenced all criticism. This secrecy enabled widespread corruption and abuse by the Marcos family, the police, and the military. Journalists faced intimidation, arrest, threats, and even violence for reporting against the regime, while state propaganda and misinformation misled the public and weakened democracy. And now, the individuals who fought dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. regardless of the consequences. Leliosa Hilo, known as Lily to family and friends, Leliosa Hilo's death was the first documented case of political prisoners' death during Marcos Sr. regime. She is a Filipino student leader and activist from Pamantasan ng lungsod ng Maynila. She served as an associate editor of PLM's then school paper Hasik, where she wrote critical essays against Marcos' dictatorship and was also part of different organizations. At that time, student activism was at its peak, although several illnesses prevented Liliosa from physically joining protests. She used her gift in writing and bedwritten masterpiece with deep sense of justice, discussing how the Marcoses killed the ever-imagined democracy. In April 1973, soldiers from the Constabulary Anti-Narcotics Unit raided her home while searching for her brother, whom they accused of being a communist. When Lyoso demanded a search warrant, the troops instead arrested and tortured her. She was taken to Camp Crame, where she died days later, bearing clear signs of abuse and injustice under martial law. And Lorena Barros, Maria Lorena Lori Barros, is a prominent writer, fighter, and advocate in her years. During this time, she also joined different movements and became an activist who soon founded the Malayang Kilusan ng Bagong Kababaihan, which seeks to promote women's rights and equality. Lori's passion went down the drain after she was charged with subversion and was detained. A year later, she escaped and went underground. Although her safety since then was at risk, she consistently wrote poems, songs, and essays until the regime announced a cash reward for her capture. Eventually, Lori was found and killed in an armed encounter with constabulary soldiers. The officers even offered her a last-minute medical treatment in exchange of information, but she refused and died with her untainted principles and beliefs. There are many more individuals who stand up for our country, such as political opponents, activists, students, journalists, union leaders, workers, and religious figures who fought using their talents in writing or by joining rallies. Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr., whose execution is key event that started the People Power Revolution that helped remove Ferdinand Marcos Sr. from being president. Along with his wife Corazon Aquino, who became the rallying point for the opposition after his death, and eventually the president after Marcos was ousted. Jose W. Diokno, a human rights lawyer and senator who was one of the first political prisoners arrested at the declaration of martial law. Lorenzo Tañada, an elderly senator and key opposition figure who consistently challenged Marcos' claims and actions. And lastly, Jaime Cardinal Sin, the Archbishop of Manila, whose call to the people over Radio Veteras was instrumental in bringing civilians to EDSA to protect the rebel soldiers during the People Power Revolution. The above names are the people we should honor because of their bravery, even when their actions put their own lives at risk. These people, whether rich or poor, sick or healthy, choose to dedicate their lives to the land where they are born.